painful enough in the nose here. Okay. It's very difficult to say right now that there's, how I feel about it, because there's obviously a flood of emotions. And emotions that cover the gamut of pride, sorrow, humor, and like many others. However, like other older veterans, the aging process is taking over, and most of the feelings have melted into pride. Pride in our country, and pride in all of us who were able to play a part in the defense of freedom, regardless of where, when, or how you serve. This pride and interest in veteran support began to grow quite large for me several years back, when I was able to join veterans building a Habitat for Humanity home for a naval veteran who unexpectedly and tragically passed away several months before his house had finished. Habitat's veterans, along with ship's crew, their response to our call for assistance to this family, which could actually be a movie in itself, really was awesome. It was overwhelming. And it put into perspective what our military had done and what the veterans are doing today. We have served in this very proud band of brothers and sisters, and as we have aged, this band even becomes tighter and more meaningful. Several of us were even adopted by ship's crew and invited to speak about Habitat. It was a relationship at these reunions that I treasure so much even today. Retired ship's crew even regaled us with stories of the Korean era. Ship's crew even went so far to put this on their website. So you can see they really got my juices going with this one. One memorable moment in particular was being called friend by the most genuine person I've ever met. And this gentleman was also a guest at this reunion. His name was John McGinty. Look up John McGinty on YouTube someday. John is a Medal of Honor recipient. He's from Louisville, Kentucky. You can see the effect he had and still has today, even after his untimely passing last year. His memory can and does stir our deepest emotions regarding country and veterans. It certainly did, and certainly does. I belong to a Korean War veterans group called Graybeards. That is how I found out that the 38th parallel crossed through Evansville. I felt this would be a golden opportunity to help make the community aware once again of what happened back in 1950, and to make sure those who stepped forward to protect our freedom will always be remembered. What even made this project more beautiful was that when Interstate 69 was first opened up in the northern part of Indiana, it was tagged Veterans Memorial Highway. I hope that title slides south. Maybe our legislators could think about this at their next meeting up in Indianapolis. If you ever get to go to Washington, D.C. and visit the Korean War Memorial, you will see why one Korean vet called it paralyzing. It certainly was that to me. Like the wall in Vietnam is to the Vietnam veterans. Literally, I could not speak for 10 minutes when I first observed it. Now, however, since Interstate 69 will go through from Mexico to Canada, we want those visitors traveling through Evansville, Indiana, to see our Korean War Memorial. And understand the meaning of that plaque. We certainly don't want to paralyze them, but we want them to remember the Korean War and those who served. You ask, what does this plaque mean to me? I am both humble and proud of its existence. Please know that it is not meant to glamorize or justify it. To me, it is a continuing opportunity for all of us to remember what took place in Korea, the so-called forgotten war. But even more than that, there's a continuing opportunity to remember the 35,000 plus souls that were killed. There's a continuing opportunity to pray for those families whose members are still MIA today. There's a continuing opportunity we will have to help remember and support the others. We will have their support. No veteran brother or sister should ever have to stand alone. Remember, remember, remember. That is our mission. That is my passion. My deepest personal thanks to all the legislators that worked so hard to make this happen. Indiana is richer because of your concerns and your actions. God bless you. God bless America.
Okay, at this time, actually before we go to our next speaker, I'd like to acknowledge all the veterans in the day, starting with why we're here this morning. Korean veterans, if you served in Korea, would you please stand? Korean veterans. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Any World War II veterans? Oh, yeah. Vietnam. Thank you, thank you. Iraq and Afghanistan. Any other veterans, please rise. Thank you for your service, one and all. At this time, I'd like to call on Ms. Anita Becker for any comments that she may have.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. It's great to be with you. I tell you what, this piece of legislation... Oh, that helps. That helps. I can just stand right over here. This piece of legislation was a 2-year effort. I called the bill at 2015 session. We had it scheduled for a hearing, and then toward the end of the session, it got so hectic that other things took precedence over it. And so I'm very pleased to have joined with Senator Toms on this issue, and I think I just want to say thank you to each and every veteran who is here. You know, freedom is not free. It is earned on the backs of the people who have served in the United States of America in the military. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today to share in that freedom. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It is very much my pleasure to have been part of this effort. It's so important. And this sign, isn't that beautiful? It's beautiful. We'll look forward to seeing that on the highway. And thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you, Senator. we'll have something for you next time, okay? Okay, at this time I would like to introduce you to a young officer that's been around for a while. He just assumed command and control actually a little while ago with the ROTC program at USI. And at this time I'd like to introduce Major Dalrymple.
Well, this podium is pretty tall, but I think I'm going to be able to speak past it just a little bit. As I was asked to speak on this subject, the Korean War, and to capture the essence of what's going on, I was really beginning to swim in an ocean of thoughts that were going through my mind. And the people that raised their hands in Korean War, only you know what happened there. And I want to tell you, you are not forgotten. So that is what is incredible about this community. That's incredible about your service and everything like that. So Major Chris Dalrymple, I run the ROTC program out at USI. I actually teach on this subject to cadets. And the Korean War is a fascinating war. It is a fascinating war to understand in a lot of perspectives. And you can only understand that through military terms that we use in the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. But greater than just that, what we still study today, and as young officers, we have to come to understand what it is that you veterans have faced, and what we could potentially face again in the near future. So in the operational context, we use operational terms known as PMISI-PT. That's political, military, economic, social, information, infrastructure, physical time, and our physical environment and time. In the tactical sense, I know you guys, I'm not going to give you a layout of tactics, I'm not going to make you tacticians, but I just want you to understand that all of what we look into the context of this from the military perspective. Now looking at it in the tactical sense. Complex in the operational, complex in the tactical sense. You got mission, enemy, terrain, time, troops, and civilian considerations. You talk about a makeup of the most austere environment to be faced with. Now let's look at the context. There are three things that I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about them real shortly because some of them were already touched on by Mr. Gills. But I want you to understand from a historical perspective, the context in which the Korean War had happened. Then I want you to understand the relevance of the Korean War on today, in the time context of what is happening today, and maybe in the near future. But then I want to point it back to the significance of what Hoosiers are doing to honor service of their members, veteran members, which I am in awe of. So looking back on the Korean War and taking under context, how did it become an unforgotten war? You got to remember that they say every generation has its own war. It was nearly just 5 years past World War II in 1950, what we call the Forgotten War, but is also known as the Unknown War, but to North or South Korea is known as 625. 625 is June 25th, 1950. That march when North Korea stormed across the demarcation line, really what we know as a 2.5-mile zone at the 38th parallel. In the construct of what was going on, we have to understand this. We were facing a vicious enemy. In a time that the world was not necessarily backing us. We were not ready for the Korean War. And the strategic concepts that President Roosevelt put together, one of the things that made us successful in World War II was the arsenal of democracy. We simply won the war because we outproduced everybody else, along with the heroes that were unsung valor and stories that were out on the battlefield. Why else did it come? Was the geopolitical fallout from World War II. George Kennan wrote in his letters, he's a diplomat from Russia, about the ideologies of Marxists and how communism has to spread to survive, and that capitalism will inevitably fail. We were facing a time when Greece, sounds familiar, its economy has crashed. Turkey, after Mussolini, was struggling. We were facing context of socialism spreading at a rapid pace. We were facing Greece falling and Turkey falling to socialism. Then came the Truman Doctrine, the concepts of how we must contain the spread of socialism. Now, there are some key major players post-World War II in the Korean War. You have the U.S., you have Korea, North and South. There was a demarcation line in 1945 that was established, later to the DMZ, which is a 2.5-mile bordered off zone. Thank you very much. Sometimes I need help. I need a lot of help. The enemy we're facing in the north, ruthless, merciless. Equal numbers to the south, about 200,000 on both sides. But the north was battle-tested, trained, equipped by Soviet equipment. The south, not so much. Not so great on leadership. The north, merciless. They would commit atrocities in hospitals, killing civilians. For you young men out there as Korean War veterans, you didn't want to be taken to POW as a POW. They would either execute you on sight, torture you, or brainwash you. There are many stories that I have read where captives, POWs, were released and they wanted to go right back because of the brainwashing. Merciless soldiers. The only way to put this in context is from another veteran. I know we heard from Mr. Gillis, but this is a Medal of Honor recipient. Ron Rosser from Columbus, Ohio, was a corporal and served as a forward observer during the war. Although he ended his Army career as a Sergeant First Class, he is one of 17 children. Times post World War II, Great Depression, they had to do something, right? And a brother of a soldier killed in the Korean War. Rosser first enlisted in 1946. And what's amazing about this story, 5 short years later, there are people that served in World War II and the Korean War. Now think about that for a second, about a mindset. I am done with the war, and now I'm getting sent back. But re-enlisted back in 1951 after learning of his brother's fate. He was a member of a heavy mortar company with the 38th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division, and was acting as a forward observer during an assault on the Chinese fortified mountain near Hongli, Korea. By the time we got to the top of the mountain, out of the 170 of us, there was only 70 or 35 left. Rosser said, I ended up as a commander. Command can drop on you at any time. I ordered the men with me to follow up the mountain. By the time I looked back, I thought I was the only one left because my men were wounded or dove for cover. You get that funny feeling when that happens. I just let our war whoop and jump into the trenches, right into the trenches. Then I ran out of ammunition. I ran down and retrieved about 13 or 14 grenades and ammunition and just kept on charging as well as bringing down the wounded. Rosser said, as far as he knew, he didn't do anything that anybody else hadn't done, that he was just doing his job. About 3 years later, all of my men that survived put me in for the Medal of Honor. Rosser said. The funny thing about it though, no one even knew my name. Rosser was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman at the White House on June 27, 1952. Now, I listen to the story and I hear about the viciousness, but what takes me is a fascinating story of the soldiers' perseverance, that American spirit to overcome despair, not so good circumstances, to prevail in the face of the enemy. That, my friend, is well worth remembering for the Korean War. And as I study the Korean War, I find story after story after story just like this. We get the idea that Korea is a mountainous terrain. It led to some of the bloodiest battles. Busan, Incheon, Chosun, the push past the Yalu River of the Chinese. Each one of those battles produced over 20,000 casualties. It led to a protracted war because of the terrain. We were fighting back in trench warfare. Trench warfare leads to stalemates. It's basically this. Whoever wins is whoever takes the least casualties. We kill as many people until you're into submission. It's not about just taking key terrain, it's about bloody battles. Talking about these things and looking at the way ahead. You know, as I was thinking, and as this is relative today, pay attention to the news. Our world is in utter chaos. We have a reemergence of the Cold War. Some would argue that it never left. Look at what Russia's doing. Look at the turmoil between North and South Korea as it still continues today. And far worse is now North Korea is a nuclear power. One of the main reasons why we reached armistice, a ceasefire in Korean War, was because of nuclear deterrence. Again, a fascinating aspect of the Korean War is that ground commanders were given the power to execute nuclear warfare. They had 4 Mark IV atomic bombs at their disposal if China started intervening again. Amazing. The question leads to this. Now that Korea has nuclear capabilities, will nuclear deterrence stop them? A good fact to think about on Korea and what's going on in the world today. This fact, in trivial in nature, although armistice was signed in 1953, there has never been a peace treaty signed, really meaning that North and South Korea are truly still at war. Let's look at circumstances and timing and the things of a global impact of what's going on that's eerily similar today as it was in the past. Greece's economy has fallen. The dominoes have started to trickle down on the European Union. Britain at that time was broke and couldn't support. This continued aggression, testing our resolve. The question leads to this. Just like back then when North Korea charged into South Korea, it was going back to Stalin and saying, when is the right time to strike? And I propose to you that they're sitting back and waiting for the right time to strike today. The significance. You guys know the significance. God bless you veterans for supporting and defending our Constitution and going about protecting our way of life. You are part of a grand scheme and what you did matter. But it touches me even close at home. My grandfather was in the Korean War, And I know as late as 66 years this year since the start of the Korean War, he doesn't talk about it much today. But I do know one story that he does continuously share. He talks about the hand of God protecting him and speaking to him on the battlefield. He talks about how all of a sudden he had this little voice to say, avoid the chow hall. Otherwise, if he would have simply went to the dining tent and ate, the mortar round that landed in the tent of his 3rd Infantry Regiment would have killed him, and I wouldn't be standing here today. You know, it was interesting before all of you have arrived, the conversations I started having with Jerry. And you start thinking about the significance of what this means to this area. And I sit back in awe. I will tell you that Evansville is a great place for veterans. They support and honor veterans, and you're never forgotten. The initiatives that they make, the things that they do are remarkable. Come to find out, what we do is kind of like fate in a way. The completion of I-69, about the time that we're honoring our Korean War veterans on honor flight. How many Korean War veterans going on the honor flight here? Did you already go?
Yeah.
How was it?
Wonderful.
I'm sorry my printer was far too late, but I'm glad you got to do it. Thinking about what is way ahead. I heard about stories of what this community is doing on the riverfront for other aspects of veterans. It's amazing. The dedication of the 38th parallel. Why it hits home. Does everybody know where the 38th parallel is in Evansville on I-69 corridor? From what I understood, it is merely 1,000 meters north of Morgan Avenue. We are that connected to you veterans that served over the Korean War. I will tell you, Hoosiers have unforgotten the Korean War, and Evansville has never forgotten the Korean War. Thank you very much.
I would be remiss if I didn't recognize a bunch of my friends up here in the front row. Some of them I've been chasing around for 3 or 4 years now, doing different projects with. At this time, I would like the Daughters of the American Revolution. Would you please stand, please?
Also, we have a couple other groups here this morning. Honor Flight, everybody knows who they are. Help our veterans get to Washington, D.C. here. Also, a bunch of people I consider very good friends, my other mates from Rolling Thunder. Thank you for being here this morning. At this time, I would like to introduce another really good friend of mine who really got me started several years ago. We've done projects together. I enjoy working with him. This time, Senator Jim Thomas.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out to this great occasion. I'll try to keep my comments brief, but I just want to first thank the Armory for letting us use their facility that we're indoors, not out in potential rain today. I want to thank also my legislative colleagues that joined me on this resolution, both in the Senate and the House. Those members are here. We're grateful for their support. I want to thank NDOT for putting together what I think is a very spectacular sign. It's going to be advertising what Evansville's connection is to the North-South Korean War. I'm going to just briefly read you the the resolution. May stumble through it because I don't have my glasses, but bear with me. A concurrent resolution urging the Indiana Department of Transportation to place a memorial sign where the 30th parallel crosses Interstate 69 just south of Morgan Avenue, North Morgan Avenue in Evansville, entitled Veterans of Korean War Memorial 30th Parallel. Indiana's veterans display the spirit of patriotism, the love of country, and the willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good, which has always helped to make our country and state great. The Indiana General Assembly recognizes the many sacrifices made by Indiana veterans in time of war. Many states, including Indiana, have designated and named portions of state and federal highways as memorials to those brave men and women who served their country so well in perilous times. The Korean War began on June 25th, 1950. President Harry S. Truman committed the United States military to a United Nations effort to stop North Korea's annexation of South Korea. Between June 25th, 1950 and July 27th, 1953, approximately 5,720,000 Americans served in the military, many of whom were stationed in Korea. The Korean War cost our nation dearly, taking more than 33,000 lives. The military personnel involved in this war sacrificed greatly for their country, but received little thanks. The people of the state of Indiana and the city of Evansville wish to honor the Korean War veterans by erecting a memorial sign where the 30th parallel crosses Interstate 69, which is just north of Morgan Avenue. And I just want to say that I think there was about 922 Evansville residents that were killed or missing in action in the Korean War. And I was just talking to the ladies in your audience here who was telling me about her brother who was still missing in action. I have a great devotion to our military, being a veteran myself. And from time to time, I think what happens in societies, we see these veterans today from World War II and Korea, and even Vietnam veterans. We see them as older people, older men, older women. And I think society sometimes loses sight of the fact that there was a time when these folks were young kids, 16, 17 years old. And they left home. They left mom and dad, left their girlfriend, their wife. They left their automobile, their car, the days for the weekend. They left a life that they was enjoying. And they'd come to the call or volunteered to serve our country. They took a great risk, paid a high price. Some paid the ultimate price. And I want people to remember that when you see these veterans today, remember that they left that safety, that atmosphere and environment that they were enjoying as a young person, and went off to war. So I have a great honor for our veterans, and I thank all of you here in the audience that served our country, and I think this country will always have a debt of gratitude for our military. Those that are serving today, far reaches of the world. And I think sometimes we need to remember that when we're celebrating occasions like this, maybe Thanksgiving, maybe a holiday, that there's young men and women that are serving right now and facing incredible risks. And I'm just happy that I could be a part of a celebration today recognizing our Korean veterans. And I think this sign's going to look really good for people traveling through to see this sign, especially for veterans, but for anyone who comes across this latitudinal line, to think about they're crossing a very point that connects this city with the North-South Korea war zone. And I was told that Indon's going to place these signs in the median, which I think is really neat because we're accustomed to seeing signs on the side, on the right side of the road, but I think the fact that they're going to be out in the middle of the interstate will really be an eye catcher. So I think this has worked out real well all the way around. I want to thank everybody for making this day what it is. I want to thank all of the families that are here, all of the veterans, all of those who paid the price for this country, We're honoring all of that. But in particular, this is the Korean Veterans Day today. Thank you for letting me be a part of this, to all of you, and that's about all I got to say. Thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Tom. Appreciate the comments this morning. This next gentleman really doesn't need an introduction. I've known him for several years. We've also worked on several projects together, just finishing up our last project with the moving of the memorials downtown. Hopefully we're going to get that done here pretty soon now. He is a veterans-oriented person. In the last several years since I've known him, I have not been to one veterans organization where we're having a problem, something like that, or having a leadership that he has not been to. All the memorial services, I've seen him in every one of them. So without further ado, I'd like to also introduce a friend of mine, Mayor Lloyd Winnigan.
Wow, Benita, I know what you're up against now. Wow. Let me just say, one of the great honors of being mayor is representing the city at Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and sending off of veterans who are flying to Washington to participate in the honor flight. It's a real honor for me personally. To all the veterans, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and from all the citizens of Evansville, thank you for your sacrifice, the sacrifice you've made, your families have made, so that we can be here to enjoy the freedoms that we have. It's a real tribute to me. I'd like to thank our legislative delegation for the hard work to make this happen. I was very pleased with Senator Tom's call to alert me to this and invite me here today. Jim, thank you. Benita, thank you. And Senator Arnold, thank you for coming all the way down from Michigan City. Yeah. Mr. Gillis, why don't you step up here with me if you don't mind. I have this long proclamation, and I'm going to just tell you there are 5 whereases and a therefore. I'm just going to cut to the last whereas. It says, whereas the city of Evansville recognizes all Korean veterans and is proud to be the site of the memorial sign of the 38th parallel in North America, honoring their service and sacrifice to our country. Therefore, be it resolved that I, Lloyd Winnigan, Mayor of the city of Evansville, do hereby proclaim Veterans of the Korean War Memorial 38th Parallel Day in the city of Evansville, and I will present this proclamation to Mr. Gillis.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, this next gentleman, him and I have, we've argued, we've laughed, we've done things together, but I've always told him in my heart that I would go to hell and back with him. At this time, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Major General Eric Schwinker.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let me just ask you this. Can all of those who would like to hear me this way?
Or would it work better this way?
Mike.
Mike is better?
Yes.
All right.
Hello, Mike. There have been some very stirring and descriptive comments made about the Korean War and the 38th parallel, but let me back up further in time. And first of all, we're talking about the 38th parallel. What's that? The parallel refers to a line of latitude that is drawn around the globe. the lines of latitude parallel the equator, and they're drawn around, shall we say, horizontal. There are other lines called longitude, and those they also have the name of meridians, and they're drawn around the surface of the globe vertically. And this was laid out many centuries ago by the old sailors in trying to figure out where they're going and where they've been and how they can make a record of that, so if they ever want to, they can go back there. And you just stop to think about it, out in the middle of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, it's kind of hard to designate where that is. You can do it in the middle of a continent on account of because you're there, you've got a compass and a tape measure, and you can measure. But they figured out then that they laid out this grid of squares around the globe, and they numbered them, of course, so they could refer to them. And everybody pretty much adopted the same approach. Many approaches were taken, and they finally finalized on one that I guess has worked out pretty well for the last several hundred years. The equator is the 0-degree line for the lines of latitude, and the 0-degree line for longitude goes through Greenwich, England. Could have gone through anywhere, but that's the place that they picked. And of course, the lines of longitude end at the two poles, North Pole and South Pole. The latitude lines go all the way around the Earth, and they don't end anywhere, they keep going. And since they don't end and they keep going, they are parallel. Two object lines, or whatever they are, if they stay the same distance apart all the time, they are parallel. That's what the 38 parallel is. It's a line of latitude that is 38 degrees up from the equator. And today it doesn't seem like it's all that close, but it has seemed like it's not too far in the past. And we're talking about Korea. We're honoring the Korean veterans today. Korea is a peninsula. It sticks out in the ocean out of the west side of the continent of Asia. And the oceans it sticks into, one of them is the Sea of Japan, the other one's the Yellow Sea, but those are just offshoots of the Pacific Ocean. That's what the big body of water is over there. And several centuries ago, at least, over 2,000 years ago, so that's a long time, the Korean peninsula contained three different territories. Sometimes they were called kingdoms, and the largest one was at the north end of the peninsula, and it occupied the whole width of the peninsula and almost 2/3 of the way down. And then at the south end of the peninsula were two smaller kingdoms. And where the dividing line between the big one at the top and the two little ones at the bottom, that dividing line sort of waved across the peninsula, but contained rivers and valleys and things that were readily discernible, so you could use it as a boundary, rather than just a straight line like down the floor. That line just happened to be at the 38th parallel. So there we go. That's the first way that the 38th parallel comes into play. Then it comes into play again at the end of World War II. I was in that one. In September of World War II, September of World War II, well, that's a good one. In September 1945, at the end of World War II, the conditions for surrender to the Japanese was that their troops on the Korean Peninsula, north of the 38th parallel, would surrender to the Russians, who entered the war against Japan in August of '45. They were a little late coming to the party, but they had a pretty big brawl of their own to take care of on the other side. And the Japanese troops south of the 38th parallel would surrender to the United States. And that did take place. And then the line of demarcation at that time happened to be at the 38th parallel. So there it comes into play again. They established the border between the two north and south countries in Korea, right along the same line of the military line where the military operations ceased.
Dead.
The country north of that line, at the 38th parallel, North Korea. They named the country south of that line, South Korea. That's how that came into business. The North Koreans surrendered to the Russians, who happened to follow the communist persuasion, and North Korea became communist. And there are good friends right across the Yalu River from them. The Chinese were also communists. They had become so at the end of World War II. South Korea surrendered to the U.S. They became a democracy. Well, communists and democracies don't get along real well. And they certainly did not on the Korean Peninsula, because as you already knew anyway before you got here today, but we're reminded that the Korean War started in 1950 when the North Koreans attacked the South Koreans. And they did attack them quite viciously, go almost all the way off of the peninsula, way south, until the UN forces landed and were able to help the South Koreans. UN, that's an abbreviation for United States. Most of the U.S. soldiers landed in there and fought Korea. The other countries did too, and the troops they had there fought valiantly, but it was mostly U.S., just like it is every other scrap that we get into. It's mostly U.S. that stands for us. They were able then to land enough troops in there and drive the North Koreans back to the Yalu River, which is the border between North Korea and China. China didn't like that all that well, so they got into it. Then they pushed back south again until the line was stabilized at the present border between North and South Korea, stabilized at that 38th parallel. Just one other thing that they talked about the 38th parallel, what Major said, 1,000 yards north of North Avenue. I don't think it's quite that far, Major. On account because at least they always told me, and I can't prove it, the 38th parallel goes down Allen's Lane. Any of you folks know where Allen's Lane is? Hoo-ha. Okay. Anybody know the Skylane Airport?
Yeah.
That's on Allen's Lane. That's on the north side of the 38th parallel. That's the same as North Korea. They don't realize that. But yeah. There was also a famous watering hole out on Allen's Lane called Gloria's Corral. Yep. It has long since, but it no longer exists. Right. But at any rate, that's where the 38th parallel is. Here, and all the way around the globe, over there. I would just like to finish my remarks by saying that I think it's wonderful that the veterans of the Korean War are being recognized and memorialized by the recognition of the 38th parallel. And I just thought I'd fill you in as to how in the world it got there in the first place. I had to go sit in the audience because I was too close to the business end of a 50 caliber machine gun in World War II, and I can't hear what the damn. I had to get out there so I could understand what was being said so that I wouldn't repeat too much of it. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate all that you do.
General, behind every good general is a good sergeant major. We have one, actually, I think the major burned our system up earlier when he was talking. No, it's not that. It's overheated, so it's down, but we have one last speaker. We'll have him come out in front if he wants to up here, but at this time, I would like to call Representative Bacon up here to do our remarks.
I'm a little bit taller than the Davis, so I should carry. So that's okay. Now, most politicians can talk loud enough here, so they shouldn't have a problem. So let me know. Well, mine's real short. Resolutions provide public officials like me opportunities to formally recognize local heroes, championship teams, and historical landmarks. In February, standing before...
Overcome and adapt.
On this side, I don't have to yell too loud. In February, standing before my colleagues in the House chamber, sharing with them the significance of the 38th parallel was a proud moment for me. We have a lot to offer in our area, and this is another example of how our community impacts the state. It was a privilege to sponsor this resolution at the State House, asking NDOT to place this sign along the 38th parallel here in our community. As we have all heard today, throughout today's celebration, the 38th parallel is historically significant, not only to Korea, but to our nation. The Korean War cost our nation greatly, claiming, as Senator Tom stated, more than 33,000 American lives. Some of those brave souls were Hoosiers, and families across Indiana, including mine, were affected. This memorial hits close to home for me, as my father was one of those veterans serving in World War II. My father was a Navy SEAL. He fought alongside other soldiers and built airstrips and roads for American forces. Both of my brothers also served in the U.S. Army and the Navy, so I have great respect and regard for all who have bravely served. Many sacrifices were made, and this tangible memorial in our district is something that will serve as a constant reminder of those sacrifices. Thousands of citizens and those traveling through our community will see this sign as a lasting tribute. Korean War veterans fought fervently for our country and deserve our recognition. Many Hoosiers have bravely answered the call to serve our nation, just like my father and brothers before me. I and our state are incredibly grateful for their service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Bacon. How you doing? All right, this concludes our dedication for this morning. As soon as I get done here, I would like all the Korean veterans and all of our legislators to please come up. We're going to probably put you behind the sign here. We're going to get some pictures, so if you would, please do that. On behalf of all of our speakers, all of our legislators, I want to thank you for being here and joining us in this dedication this morning. God bless each one of you. God bless our city, our great state, and the United States of America. Thank you.
You're welcome.